I stood in the dim hallway of my late sister's house, the ceiling fan clicking like a slow metronome above me. The executor had just handed me the estate folder when a text from my nephew lit up my phone. Aunt Miriam, bad news. The watercolor of the Red Orchard sold. 45,000. We split it already. Hope that's okay. I stared at the message. My heart jolted once, then settled into a cold, steady beat. The Red Orchard? They couldn't mean that one. Not the piece our mother painted at the end of her life. The one she'd wrapped in muslin cloth and whispered, "It's for you. Only you will know what to do with it." 45,000. They'd sold it like a yard sale trinket. I walked to the back bedroom where my sister kept what remained of our family history. A cedar chest, a few photo albums, and the lingering scent of lavender she stitched into every quilt. But the chest was half open, hollowed out. Empty. The rest of the paintings, Mother's quiet life's work, were nowhere. I knelt on the carpet, my fingers trembling over the dust outlines where the canvases should have been. If the Orchard watercolor fetched 45,000, what would the others bring? Had they been sold already? Hidden? Stolen? A single truth rose like a tide swallowing reason. Someone in the family had decided that my mother's legacy was theirs to slice apart and pocket. For a long moment I didn't move. Not until a realization struck me, sharp as broken glass. The estate documents. The storage unit listings. The numbering system my mother used from the 70s onward. If the others weren't here, they had to be somewhere. I stood, the old bones in my knees grinding but determined. 45,000 was only the tip of a much deeper betrayal. And I wasn't about to let my mother's life's work vanish into someone else's greed. The fan clicked again overhead, steady, rhythmic, almost encouraging. I whispered to the empty room. "All right then. Let's find what they thought they could hide." And with that, the hunt began. The storage records reveal something impossible. An undocumented unit in my mother's name, still active and paid for by someone in the family. My name is Miriam Dalton, and I am 70 years old, though most days I forget to feel it. I taught literature for 33 years, and while the university forced retirement on me with a cordial smile, I never quite retired from thinking critically, digging for truth, or refusing to accept an easy answer. My sister Ruth passed 3 months ago, leaving behind 2 grown children who believed grief exempted them from decency. I loved them once. I still try to, in that patient way older women often love the young who disappoint them. But even age doesn't soften betrayal. I've spent my life believing in careful work, quiet justice, and the kind of dignity my mother embodied each time she set her brush to canvas. She painted rural hillsides, orchards in blushing light, and women working in silence. She never chased fame, though she'd been offered gallery space 3 times in her youth. She preferred truth to spectacle, depth to praise. And she believed, perhaps too sincerely, that her children would understand her legacy. I thought I did. I thought Ruth did too. The Orchard watercolor they sold, $45,000, was only one piece of a vast body of work Mother catalogued over 5 decades. She assigned each painting a number, logged it in a cloth-bound ledger, and tucked the corresponding canvases into portfolios or handmade crates. As a girl, I used to sit beside her as she updated the ledger, the ink precise and slow. She'd say, "Art is evidence, Miriam. Evidence of a life lived honestly." I didn't expect those words to become instructions for a future investigation. As I sifted through the estate folder that afternoon, I felt my age in a different way, not as frailty, but as clarity. When you reach 70, nonsense slips from your hands like water. What remains is purpose. A refusal to be hurried or intimidated. The folder contained bank statements, insurance papers, and one page that made my breath hitch. A billing record for a storage facility 30 miles north, under my mother's name, paid automatically through an account I didn't recognize, one created after her death. Someone had kept that unit active, quietly, for 6 years. I pressed the page flat on the table. If the paintings were in that unit, someone in the family knew, and had decided not to tell me. I buttoned my coat, slid Mother's ledger into my bag, and whispered, "Time to see what they thought belonged to them." At the storage office, the manager pulls up the unit record and freezes when she sees the authorized user list. Family is rarely the gentle portrait outsiders imagine. Ours was painted in harsher strokes, loyalty strained by silence, affection filtered through duty, and the unspoken rivalry that grew between Ruth and me as adults. Not hostility, just a persistent ache, like the ghost of an old bruise. Ruth married young. 2 children by 25. She devoted herself to them, sometimes to her detriment. I chose academia, a small apartment, and a life built around books and volunteer work. We loved each other, but in deeply different languages. When our mother died, the will named both of us as heirs to her personal belongings, with one handwritten addendum: "Miriam will know what to do with the paintings." Ruth never contested it. Or so I believed. Now, looking back, I can recall the flickers of discomfort when the subject came up. The subtle pivot in conversation. The way her children, my nephew Daniel and my niece Elise, avoided acknowledging the artwork entirely. But grief distorts memory. You forgive what you shouldn't. You assume kindness where indifference dwells. I arrived at the storage facility, a long, low building painted a quiet blue. The manager, a woman in her 40s with compassionate eyes, typed the unit number into her system. A crease formed between her brows. "Is something wrong?" I asked. She turned the screen slightly toward me. The authorized users: my mother, my sister, Ruth, and Daniel. My nephew. The same nephew who had texted me so casually about the $45,000 sale. I thanked the manager and walked back to my car, breathing slowly, evenly, as my emotions arranged themselves in a neat, hard row. It wasn't the money. It was the presumption. The entitlement. The quiet rewriting of intention, as though my mother's wishes were optional guidelines. I thought of Elise, the more reserved of the two. She had always been polite, almost painfully so, but she followed her brother's lead in most matters. If Daniel accessed the unit, did she know? Did she help? Or was she, like me, kept in the dark? As I drove home, the sky grew into a muted lavender dusk, the kind my mother used to paint with gentle strokes, never harsh contrasts, just softening edges. I tried to imagine what she would say now. Probably something infuriatingly calm, like, "Truth will settle where it belongs." But truth never settles on its own. Someone has to place it. I parked outside my house, sat a moment with the engine ticking, and accepted what lay before me. This was no misunderstanding. This was a pattern. A quiet scheme, kept alive for years. And if they'd taken one painting, they might have taken more. The next morning, the storage manager calls. My access request triggered an alert. Someone else has just entered the unit. The manager's voice carried urgency. "Ms. Dalton, I thought you should know. Someone used one of the old access codes to enter the unit 15 minutes ago." A pulse of cold anger tightened in my chest. Is the person still on the property? Yes. But I can't legally detain them. I was already in the car. When I arrived, I saw Daniel standing beside the open unit, a flashlight in hand, sweat on his brow despite the cool morning. Inside, wooden crates were stacked like soldiers awaiting orders. He froze when he saw me. "Aunt Miriam. This isn't, I was just checking something." "Checking what?" My voice was level, almost gentle, which unsettled him more than shouting ever could. He swallowed hard. "I didn't know you knew about the unit." "And yet," I said, "you knew plenty about the paintings." His jaw tightened. "Mom never cared about the art. She said you didn't either. We needed the money. Elise couldn't pay her student loans, and..." I held up a hand. "Walk carefully, Daniel. Every sentence you add is another confession." He looked at the crates, then at me. "You don't understand. The orchard piece sold fast. The others, well, the market's weird. We're trying to figure out which are worth appraising." We. Elise and me. I stepped inside the unit. My breath caught at the sight, at least 20 crates, each marked with my mother's numbering system. If these held what I suspected, the value wasn't in the tens of thousands. It was in the millions. Daniel followed my gaze and said quietly, "You weren't supposed to find this yet." Yet. He shut his eyes a moment, then opened them with a resolve that was not courage, but stubbornness. "We thought, maybe it would be easier to divide everything if you didn't know how much was here." The words carried the full weight of betrayal. Not a single act. Not a mistake. A plan. Years in the making. I walked slowly around the crates, tracing the numbering with my fingertips. Each one corresponded to entries in the ledger I carried in my bag. Mother trusted me with the system. And her grandchildren had gambled that I'd never check. When I turned back to Daniel, I saw panic rising behind his eyes. "What are you going to do?" he whispered. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because revenge, when done ethically, begins with knowledge. Patient, thorough, and undeniable. I open the first crate and discover a hidden envelope addressed to me. In my mother's handwriting. The envelope was yellowed, sealed with the kind of tape my mother used on everything from birthday cards to casserole dishes. My name, Miriam, was written in her looping script. I stepped out of the unit and opened it while Daniel watched, pale and restless. Inside was a letter and a copy of Mother's will amendment. Her letter read, "These crates are for the daughter who understood my silence. Keep them together. They are a single story, not to be broken apart." My throat tightened. The amended will confirmed that the entire art collection, finished and unfinished, was bequeathed solely to me. It had been signed and notarized 2 years before her death. This wasn't ambiguous. This wasn't shared property. This was intentional, documented inheritance. Daniel reached for the paper. I stepped back. "No," I said. "You've touched enough that wasn't yours." Over the next days, I began the investigation. I hired an attorney with experience in estate theft. I scanned every crate, logging its contents and cross-referencing them with the ledger. I located the gallery owner who had once courted my mother's work. She provided valuation records, including an estimate for the orchard watercolor, far higher than what Daniel admitted selling it for. I found evidence of additional sales. Small ones. Quiet ones. Payments made to an account in Daniel's name, with occasional transfers to Elise. My attorney reviewed everything. "This is not casual mishandling," she said. "This is deliberate misappropriation of estate property. And because the will amendment is clear, you have full standing to pursue restitution." I nodded. "Will it destroy them?" "That's not your responsibility," she said gently. "Your responsibility is truth." I appreciated her clarity. Revenge, in my mother's philosophy, was simply justice reaching its rightful recipient. Meanwhile, I continued documenting. Photographs of every crate. Serial numbers. Condition reports. And most importantly, a timeline showing precisely how Daniel and Elise accessed the unit, removed items, sold pieces, and concealed proceeds. One evening, while reviewing records at my dining table, I found an older bank statement in Ruth's things. A line item stood out: automatic payments to the storage facility, initiated years earlier. My sister had kept the unit active. She had preserved Mother's legacy. She had protected it until her death. And her children had exploited what she honored. I felt a complex weave of sorrow and determination settle over me. This would not be a loud war. I would not raise my voice. I would not trade insults. I would use truth, documented and irrefutable, delivered with the calm weight of a woman who refuses to be dismissed. My attorney calls. Daniel has tried to move the remaining crates to a new location. The attorney's voice was firm. "We need to act immediately." He arranged a transport truck. "We can stop it, but only if you authorize full legal intervention." It wasn't a difficult decision. I'd given Daniel every possible chance to correct his course by saying almost nothing, Just my steady presence in the unit had been opportunity enough. But he had doubled down. I authorized the intervention. Within hours, a cease and desist order was issued. The transport company, warned of potential liability, refused to proceed. Daniel showed up at my house at dusk, shoulders squared, like a child mimicking bravery. "Aunt Miriam, you're blowing this out of proportion." I opened the door wider, inviting him to speak. He looked thrown by my calmness. "You could have told us," he said. "You could have shared. We're family." "You sold a painting behind my back," I said, "and lied about its value." He flinched. "You accessed a unit legally entrusted to me." His eyes darted away. "And you attempted to move the collection so I couldn't trace it." He exhaled sharply. "You don't need the money. Elise is drowning in debt. I'm barely scraping by. This could change our lives." I softened my voice, but not my stance. "And what about my life? Or your grandmother's wishes? Does her legacy matter only when converted into cash?" His throat worked, but no answer came. "Daniel," I said, "I'm not punishing you. I'm stopping you." The next day, with my attorney present, I filed formal claims of estate theft, financial misrepresentation, and illegal possession of inherited property. It was methodical, calm, irrefutable. We scheduled mediation for the following month. I didn't relish the confrontation, but I welcomed its clarity. Revenge, ethical and deliberate, had begun to take shape, through truth, not fury. I prepared meticulously. Every document labeled. Every timeline precise. Every valuation supported by expert opinion. When Elise called in tears, whispering that she never wanted any of this, that Daniel insisted they deserved the artwork as part of the family story, I listened. Then I asked, "And what did you believe?" She hesitated for too long. I understood then, they weren't united by greed alone, but by fear. Fear that I, the quiet aunt, the academic, the woman without children of her own, might actually enforce boundaries they never expected me to hold. But age had freed me from the need to be liked. Justice mattered more. Mediation day arrives, and Daniel brings a surprise representative who claims ownership of several paintings. The mediator's office smelled faintly of eucalyptus and paper, an oddly soothing combination. Daniel sat beside a sharply dressed woman who introduced herself as a private buyer. She claimed she had already purchased 3 of my mother's paintings from him and therefore owned legal title. My attorney slid a folder across the table. "Those sales," she said coolly, "were unauthorized transactions of stolen property. Here is the amended will, the storage receipts, the photographic evidence of removal, the valuation logs, and the signed admissions your client unknowingly emailed to Ms. Dalton." The buyer paled. Admissions. My attorney opened the page containing Daniel's text. "The orchard one sold. We split it already. Hope that's okay." The buyer leaned away from him, furious. "You told me you had full rights to the collection." "I thought I did," he muttered. "No," I said quietly. "You hoped you did." The mediator reviewed the documents long and slow. At the end, she folded her hands. "Legally, ethically, and contractually, the entire collection belongs only to Ms. Dalton. Restitution is required. The sold pieces must be recovered or reimbursed at full appraised value. Additional damages may apply." Daniel's face drained of color. Elise, seated behind him, covered her mouth with trembling fingers. The buyer excused herself angrily and left the room. Consequence settled over the table like winter frost. Silent, undeniable. Daniel whispered, "You're ruining us." "No," I said. "I'm teaching you." And I meant it. The official agreement forced them to repay the orchard sale proceeds, return unsold pieces, and compensate for the unauthorized transactions. It also required them to relinquish any future claim to the collection. They signed. Not because they wanted to, but because truth cornered them in a place where excuses could no longer breathe. As we exited the building, Elise approached me. Her voice shook. "I'm sorry, Aunt Miriam. I didn't know how far he'd gone." "You knew enough," I said gently. "But you can choose differently now." She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. And with that, justice took its quiet place. When I finally opened the last crate at home, I discover a series of paintings my mother never logged, her final, secret project. The final crate was lighter than the others. I carried it to my living room, set it gently on the rug, and opened it. Inside were 7 canvases wrapped in muslin. No numbering. No labels. Just my mother's soft handwriting on a single tag, "For Miriam's eyes first." I unwrapped them slowly. Each painting showed the same orchard, at dawn, at dusk, in rain, in winter, in full bloom. A life study of color and patience. A meditation on seasons. Her seasons. In the last painting, I recognized her. A figure seated on a stool beneath a crooked apple tree, facing away, brush in hand. The style was looser, more vulnerable. I felt her presence in every stroke. I sat for a long time with the canvases surrounding me. Justice had been served. But justice is not the end of a story. It is the clearing of a path. I took steps to preserve the collection properly. A museum agreed to host a retrospective exhibition. An art historian interviewed me for weeks, unraveling the quiet brilliance my mother had tucked into every brushstroke. The world, at last, would see her. As for Daniel and Elise, the restitution plan extended over years. It would not break them. It would simply remind them, consistently, firmly, of the consequences of crossing a boundary drawn long before they were born. In time, Elise reached out again. She asked if she could help catalog the collection's digital archive. I allowed it. Not because she earned it, but because she sought it with humility. Daniel kept his distance. That, too, was part of the healing. I found peace in the quiet hours, restoring frames, reading my mother's notes, and letting the orchard paintings fill my home with the gentle resilience of her spirit. As the museum prepares the exhibition, they discover something that changes the entire valuation of the collection. 2 weeks before the exhibition, the museum director called. In reviewing the Orchard series, he said, "We discovered a stylistic evolution previously undocumented in your mother's period. It positions her not just as a regional artist, but as a significant figure in American modern pastoralism. The collection is far more important than we understood." I thanked him, though my voice trembled slightly. Mother had painted simply, quietly, never expecting this. As I walked through my home that evening, the orchard paintings glowed in the soft lamplight. I thought of family, how it can wound, how it can heal, how it can mirror our own strengths and blind spots. Revenge, when shaped with dignity, isn't destruction. It's restoration. Truth returned to its rightful place. I sat at my desk, opened my journal, and wrote the moral I hoped to carry forward. When someone steals from you, they take more than an object. They take intention, memory, story. But when you stand calmly, firmly, and without cruelty, you don't just reclaim what was taken. You reclaim yourself. To the viewer of my story, I say this: never underestimate the quiet person in the room. We see more than we speak. We wait longer than most expect. And when we act, it is with the full weight of truth behind us. That is the legacy my mother left me. And it is the legacy I choose to pass on.